You are a good fantasy manager, which means you probably don't want to look like a complete idiot adding the traps off the waiver wire while everybody else is picking up league winners, myself included. So I put together this list of players that are complete traps we need to avoid. That way we don't end up on the league group chat, starting out with a hot one in Demario Douglas. As we get into it, please help us hit the like goal on this video and subscribe if you are new, because nobody is giving you both sides of the ball with the ads and traps like I do in this video. I just posted the top waiver ads yesterday if you want to check that out as well, and we are growing at an insane rate. So thank you to all of you guys. But the number one mistake fantasy managers make is only looking at the fantasy points. Demario Douglas, he is a victim of that. 20 fantasy points against a very tough Falcons defense last week. It is impressive, catching 4 of his 6 total targets for 100 yards and a touchdown. Now, I could sit up here and say he only played 24% of the snaps. He didn't get a real chance, and he still managed to do everything that he just did. But was he actually efficient? The answer is yeah, he actually was decently efficient, but his snaps is the reason why he is a trap because of how the Patriots do use him. We look at Kayshon Boutte. He is likely going to miss week 10 versus the Buccaneers with a hamstring injury. That is why everybody is going and adding Demario Douglas, because he looks like the next man up. But only playing 24% of the snaps when Kayshon Boutte only played 26%, went out early in the first half. It's not saying that Demario Douglas is this next guy up. His snap share did not increase whatsoever after he went out. The reason for that is because Demario Douglas is a slot wide receiver. He plays the exact same role of wide receiver as Stefon Diggs does, which isn't a bad thing, but his snap share dropped significantly from last season when he was playing 70, 80, 90% of the snaps to now 30, 20, now that we have Stefon Diggs, because they're both slot wide receivers. You can't have two at one time, which is exactly why he is a trap this week, because we saw last week Kyle Williams comes in and fills in 1-for-1 with that Kayshon Boutte role, playing a season-high 46% of the snaps. Even though he did not do anything whatsoever with it, the injury does not give Demario Douglas any kind of boost, because it won't push him up the depth chart for any type of increased playing time or snaps and routes. Despite a great fantasy day, the Patriots offense is rolling and a neutral matchup coming. Leave him on the waiver wire right next to Devin Singletary. It is clear though, from week 9, he will 100% have a role at some point and for the continuous part of this year. So why are we avoiding him? So let's unpack this in a way most creators won't. If you guys do appreciate gaining knowledge and information like this, please consider hitting that follow button or subscribing to show your support. As we do that, 7.1 fantasy points on 8 carries for 43 yards. Not necessarily terrible. A few receptions on 56% of the snaps to Tracy's 44%. So it does look like he is leading this running back. But the split was very similar to what we saw last season before we did have Cam Scatterbo, where Devin Singletary would take the short yardage stuff and some of the goal line work, and then Tyron Tracy would work in on the third downs and pretty much everything else in the receiving game as well. Well, last week, Tyron Tracy actually led the two running backs in almost everything until the fourth quarter, where he picked up an injury that he tried to play through, causing Devin Singletary to play 14 of the total 17 snaps in the fourth quarter. His involvement was not because of game script, it was just because of injury. Now, Tracy will be the more valuable of the two running backs this season, but when you're splitting 50-50 with Devin Singletary, when Jackson Dart is still taking a good amount of rushing usage and as well in the red zone, in a realistic world, we aren't trusting Devin Singletary to be startable for us. He will be touchdown dependent, and how often will he get those? I don't think Devin Singletary is a guy that we need to stash. Even if Tyron Tracy were to get injured for the rest of the season, which we can't predict, it's hard to say that he's going to be fantasy viable. So unless you just want to handcuff running back, don't treat him as any more than what he is. Similar to Torrey Horton, who is coming off a monster game last week with 2 touchdowns for 20.8 fantasy points. And he's shown some flashes this year. Like, this is actually a guy I do like and I do believe in. More in Dynasty, though, not really this year to be fantasy viable. I mean, Cooper Kupp was out with a hamstring injury and a heel injury. There is a chance that he does miss week 10. If he does versus the Cardinals, it's still not a spot where I'm trusting to start him. And Horton did have an increased snap share because there was no Cooper Kupp dealing with that injury, and it was a blowout game versus the Washington Commanders, so his snaps are already going to be higher because of that. Not to mention, the Washington Commanders defense is absolutely atrocious. They're dealing with a ton of injuries. It is one of the most positive matchups to wide receivers this year. So because of that, like when you play the Cincinnati Bengals, those numbers weren't necessarily crazily impressive. I mean, 4 targets, 20 routes run on 20 passing attempts from Sam Darnold. Now the team is 30th in passing attempts. They are super efficient on their passing attempts, so unlike other teams, it's not terrible. But again, with Jason getting the target share he does get, with Cooper Kupp inevitably coming back healthy, It's just not one where we need to be trusting a 4 target per game from Torrey Horton, especially considering he saw an increased number of snaps and has very negative matchups coming up in the next second half of the season. So until Cooper Kupp is out for the rest of the season or JSN is dealing with injury, Torrey Horton's not a guy this season that will end up being startable for you. You should also be avoiding Olamide Zaccheaus, who is actually playing very, very well right now. He's averaging 8 fantasy points per game as a clear wide receiver 3 for the Bears, running a ton of routes per game as well because they use a lot of 3 wide receiver, 11 personnel sets. But that's the main issue here. There's so many mouths to feed on this Bears offense with DJ Moore, where you have Colson Loveland turning into a top tight end. I mean, you have Rome Odunze, who didn't do anything last week, but is still a top wide receiver, and 32 pass attempts on average from Caleb Williams. It is going to be tough. It's not going to cut it. He had 6 receptions on 8 targets last week for 58 yards and a touchdown. Amazing. But the number one thing is they play the Cincinnati Bengals. So how impressive really is it? They're allowing the most points per game to opposing teams at 33 per game. The most yardage per game to opposing offenses at 426.6. They can barely get quarterback pressure. I mean, it's the literal best matchup of any single team, on top of the fact that we did not have Luther Burden in last week's matchup with a concussion. It was really a testament to how bad the Bengals defense is than it was Olamide Zaccheaus being a sleeper pickup that we need to go through and add for the future. And you can see that with his season stats. He's only averaging about 18% target share on the year. He's just way too far down the depth chart with all of his numbers as well. It just doesn't look very positive. Again, not a guy we can go through and start with confidence, especially when Luther Burden does come back. And we see a similar situation with Pat Freiermuth, who has been hot over the last few weeks, dropping 11.7 fantasy points on the Colts last week in what was a dominant win. He's averaging about 5 targets per game over the last 3 weeks. We can absolutely never trust this man, though. You look at the snap split, it's one thing if you're running 90% of the routes as a top tight end on your offense, even if you're only getting a couple targets and not really great yet. But when you're splitting literally everything at the tight end position on your own team, you don't even have a chance. Diving into that deeper, again, guys, people will not go through this with you on YouTube, so make sure to hit that like button, subscribe if you are new. Pat Freiermuth ran 30 routes. We had Jonnu Smith running 17. We even had Darnell Washington running 17 routes. This is a tight end that really has never been known as a prominent pass catcher or even ran any routes just consistently on a per game basis. And all of these tight ends have been increasing their snaps, so it really just dilutes this position for him. They use heavy personnel sets to protect Rodgers and help the run game work even more. And when you have DK as your only real wide receiver, you can afford to run those heavy personnel sets because there's really nobody else you need on the field. A simple case of him just not getting enough involvement and being inconsistent in an offense that is relatively inconsistent makes him one of the biggest traps in fantasy football right now. We don't need to be going through and adding him or any of these tight ends or Calvin Austin either. For a similar reason, this team is running a ton of heavy personnel, taking 1 wide receiver off the field, sometimes even 2, and keeping DK as really the only guy. And these wide receivers in total run some of the least routes per game, giving them the least amount of opportunities. If you're a T. Higgins or Jamar Chase that's running 40, 50 routes per game compared to a Calvin Austin, DK Metcalf that's only running in the 20s, you're not going to have as many opportunities. And due to that low pass volume, there's not a lot of opportunity for Calvin Austin, who is already the number 2 wide receiver behind DK Metcalf. We did actually see a snap decrease from him last week due to coach's decision, even though he did actually play very efficient and very good on the snaps he did play. All things considered, he's not getting the opportunity with, again, those 20 to 30 routes per game, with a team that is 23rd in passing attempts and has the lowest pace of play in the league. And the Steelers are rumored to be shopping a wide receiver in free agency before the deadline. They might have already gotten a guy by the time you see this video, but just know Calvin Austin is not a guy that's going to be super fantasy viable for you. But the biggest trap of the week, the guy that you've been waiting for in this video, again, guys, make sure to not add Emari Demercado. Coming off, all things considered, a pretty strong game in Week 9 against the Cowboys, and I'm about to dive into that. Make sure to hit that like button if you guys do appreciate this video and you've made it this far. But you look at Demercado as you guys are doing that. 8.8 fantasy points on 14 rushing attempts for 79 yards, 5.6 yards per carry, very efficient day. But we have to understand that it is the Cowboys defense who is one of the most positive in allowing yards per game, efficiency, fantasy points to running back so far this year. And the Cardinals will not be controlling games like they did every single week with the Cowboys. I mean, you have Kyler Murray eventually coming back. It's going to give a little bit less upside to these running backs as far as their workload and red zone efficiency goes. Bam Knight is very much still in the mix. He only had 9 carries for 27 yards, not as efficient as Demercado was. But you look at the split between the two, he did have a higher snap share than Demercado, and he doubled him in routes run. And two things that don't necessarily give me green flag vibes for Amari DeMarcado. Now, he is coming off injury, so you can chalk some of that up to maybe he's just seeing less snaps because of that. But Bam took 100% of the goal line opportunities. He led in pretty much everything outside of third downs. So it's not showing that Amari DeMarcado is going to get this role. He just isn't on the field a ton. It's showing that the only time they're really using him is on third downs, which is a role like that is somewhat valuable. But on top of the Cardinals getting very negative matchups to come in the second half of the year, and one against the Seahawks defense now, which is top 10 in fantasy points restricted to running backs. They don't allow a lot of efficiency. That defense is on a tear right now. Trey Benson is also going to be returning in a few weeks for this team, which is going to move Amari DeMarcado down the depth chart that much more. There's just way too much competition. It's not a guy that we can start, and we've seen even when all the top running backs get injured, he's not fantasy viable, so leave him on the waiver wire. That's going to finish out this video, guys. Make sure to stick around and have your post notifications on for tomorrow's video because we will be dropping 3 or 4 more this week, and we'll see you in those ones. All glory to the man above.